So in this video we'll learn about connection pooling or the database connection pooling using Tomcat. Okay, so we'll do it in servlet. So the idea of connection pooling is that you have a set of database connections which are reused every time, because closing a database connection and opening it every time is a costlier operation. So I'll call it a con pool demo. Okay, and for this thing the only thing we will be needing is a database driver. So today we will be using the MySQL database for our thing, and for that purpose we will require a MySQL driver. Okay, so let's get this thing ready. So now the first thing that we need to do here is to add the library or the jar file for this thing. So for this thing what you could do is you could just go and grab the latest version of MySQL connector jar. Okay, Java jar. Okay, you could just go out there and you can find it here. Okay, so like J connector, it would have all sorts of thing. Okay, so like you could platform independent thing and it would give you a compressed star or something. Okay, and I've already got it, so I'll just import this thing. I'm using NetBeans. You can use Eclipse or any other IDE of your choice. So like I will click on add jars. So here I would find this thing MySQL connector, and I'll just copy to the libraries folder of this project. Okay, so far so good. And now what we need to do is first we need to create a connection pooling utility. So for that purpose what I will do is I will create a package called helpers. Okay, again, and in this thing I will create a class, a simple class, not a servlet. Okay, a simple class called DB utility. You can name it anything you want. Okay, so like there are no naming conventions or restrictions here, but yeah, name it something that you could easily decipher when you're looking back at the code after a long time. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do here is we need to take a basic data source. So like basic data source is, you can say, a class in this thing. So like data source. Okay, so like see this is the import for this thing. It's a mouthful of an import. So like org.apache.tomcat.dbcp.dbcp2.basic data source. Okay, so usually I use this method only to get the imports. I do not remember the package names and stuff, but yeah, it could come handy if you're a learner. So moving forward, second thing we need to do is, we need to remember here that whatever function or the subject or the variable that we are taking needs to be a static variable, so that it can be accessible from any other classes without a need of instantiation. And this is specifically important when it comes to using it as a connection pooling mechanism, because if you create it as a non-static variable and every time you need to create an instance of it, so like it will allot different types of, you can say, data sources every time. So static variable or a static function has only a single copy. Okay, so as opposed to any other type of function or a variable which could have multiple copies as per the instance. So like we do not need multiple copies of the connection, that forfeits our purpose. So what we need to do here is we need to keep it static. So far so good. Okay, so let's create the function for this thing. So function, you can call it at get data source. Okay, so like public get data source, and for this thing the data type should be, okay, data type should be also a data source, basic data source. So it should return a data source. So we will be fetching or calling this function to fetch the data source. Okay, so inside this function what we need to do is, now we need to create a, or you can say first we will do a simple check if the data source, existing data source, is null or not. Okay, so initially when the function will be called, if this data source is null, then we need to create a data source. Okay, so if it is null, okay, so then what we'll do is we'll not define an else for this thing. Let's just go with this thing. First we'll create the connection. So for this thing, what I will do is I'll just check if I've got this thing up and running. Okay, no, so like I need to switch on my XAMPP. Okay, just this thing, sorry, just have to change some few settings here. I'll just stop Apache version for this thing and I'll just start this XAMPP. Okay, and I've restarted the XAMPP. Cool. So like now if I just refresh this thing, and it should work. So like we have got this thing up and running. So like I'll just take any database. Let's just take any random database. Okay, because these are production level databases. First LaraDB should be fine. Yeah, this is like for my other Laravel tutorial I'm using this one. So what I will do is I'll just fetch data from this table, okay, or from this database itself. So what I will need to do is I will just need to check the database name. So I'll just put in all the necessary details that we need to fill in here. So first thing is we need to connect to the database via a username. So my username for this thing is root. You can create your user as well. Okay, if you are not using it for the production purpose, then what you could do is if you're using you can say the console thing, then you can directly use add user or grant privilege and stuff. If you're using PHP MyAdmin or something, then you can have this. You can create your user accounts and set privileges for this thing. Just remember to set a password for this thing if you're using this thing on production. For now it is a local database that I'm showing you, so it does not have any password. So if you're using anything on production, you need to set passwords to that thing. If you do not set the password, ransomware attacks will be rampant on your database. So just make sure you set the password for the user. For demo purpose, the program that we are creating will not have a password for this thing. Like I have not even set the password. Again, a dangerous exercise if you do it in production. So just make sure you set strong password. Okay, and after that I need to define the JDBC driver. Okay, so JDBC driver will help me find the package for this thing. So we are using MySQL. So MySQL driver. So how do you usually find this thing? So like see here, if you could look at this thing. So this is the thing, JDBC. This, so it will have a driver class inside this, com.mysql.jdbc.driver. See here, you should have a driver class. Driver, yeah, see. So this class has a driver class. Okay, so what I will do is I'll just write com. So let's just check in which package this thing is. So com.mysql.jdbc.driver. Okay, after this thing we need to define the DB URL, or you can say the database URL. Okay, after defining the database URL, we can get started with the connection. So to define the database URL is basically like you can say protocol URLs that we use, different types of protocol URLs like HTTP, FTP, Telnet and stuff. Okay, so first thing is the protocol name JDBC : then again the database name. Okay, so it is a bridge, so you have to define this way: JDBC : MySQL, then // and the host name here. So I'm connecting on my computer itself, so I'm using localhost. If you are connecting to a remote host, you need to specify the IP and also do the remote host enabled settings in that system. Okay, you need to edit some settings in MySQL INI files. Okay, so we'll discuss about that later in some other video about what actual changes you need to do when you set up a remote host or something. But for now, just remember that thing. Okay, so after that thing, you need to define the port. So MySQL has this port 3306. If you are using PostgreSQL, it has like 5432, I guess 5432, and Oracle has something like 1527 or something. So ports you could get in their documentation. Okay, and after that you need to define the DB name. So DB name would be here. The DB name is Lara test DB. Okay, so what I will do is, Lara test DB and semicolon. After that, we will define a variable in this class. Okay, or we will create or instantiate a variable of basic data source, and we'll call it DS for now. And what we'll do is new basic data source. So now is the trickier part about the settings that we provide here. Okay, so first thing, we'll set the things that we have defined over here. So like ds dot set driver class name, set driver class name. Okay, so like if you are using a driver directly, if you're having this thing, you can use it directly as well. And driver class name. Then the second thing we need to do is you can set any of these parameters that you have given. DB URL. Oh, I guess I've messed up this thing. Sorry. JDBC underscore driver. Okay. So like driver class name is this class name. Okay. com.mysql.jdbc.driver. After that, we'll set the user ID password. Just make sure you do not forget this 4 settings. These are like core settings that you need to provide with every connection to any kind of database, whether it is a MySQL database, it's a Postgres database, or any sort of like Microsoft based database or any sort of thing. Okay. Yes, sorry. Set password. Okay. So let me check if I have put in all those things. Yeah, sure. So after that, what we need to do is we need to define the settings for the connection pool. So there are 2 things that we need to set. That is the active open connections or the prepared statements, how many statements we want, and the maximum number of idle connections. Okay, so ds dot set minimum idle connection. Okay, minimum idle connection. Okay, so we'll set it to 1. Okay, you could set it to like 2 or 3. If you are having a bigger server, you could set it to a larger number. Max idle connections, however low as possible, you should set it to that way. So like max to 10 or like 5 is also enough, because if you set a lot of max idle connections, so like that will keep your threads occupied or sort of thing. So just make sure the number is slightly lower. Set max open prepared statement. So like how many statements we can have open, or we can say simultaneously running at any given instance. Max open prepared statements. So like here you could pass some like a larger number, like 50 or 100 connections, depending upon whether you are running a dedicated server or you are running sort of shared hosting space or something. So like depends on what kind of environment that you are running in. Okay, it's a shared VPS or something, then you need to set this thing to a bit of a lower number so that you do not pass your resource consumption or something. Okay, and other things like connection lifetime and stuff, it's better as a beginner you do not mess up with these settings. Okay, so if you mess up with these settings, the connection might close preemptively, okay, even before sending a data or any sort of a thing. So that could be another problem that you might encounter. Okay, so like okay, so I'll set it to 100. You can set it to any number that you want. Just remember not to set it beyond like 150 or something. So like what I've personally observed is it deteriorates the performance. So like, sorry, data source is equals to ds, and after that thing what we'll do is simply return this thing, return data source, okay, and we are done with this thing. And now what we'll do is we will actually use this thing into our servlet. Okay, so I'll just create another package here. We'll call it servlets. Okay, and we'll call it what's the name of this thing? Test servlet. Okay, we need to come up with better names, but yeah, for now it's perfect. Test servlet. Add information, this thing. So it will add this thing into the web.xml. What it will do, I'll show you in a second. So here's this file, web.xml. So it would create the servlet mapping for this thing and the servlet for this thing. So servlet name, the class along with its package name and the class name. Okay, so class name is test servlet and mapping name is /servlet. Okay, so yeah, so like let's get rid of all these things. Okay, we'll need the try catch part of course, but for now keep it this way. First I will show you the bad method or the wrong way to create a connection pool. Okay, for that part also we'll need to define one function here. So yeah, let's just do this part and then we'll get to defining functions and stuff. Okay, so first thing we need to do here is basic data source, you can call it ds or bds, whatever you want it to be. And here now we'll call our utility db utility dot static. Sorry, I forgot to add the static part here. Okay, so like I told you 100 times to not to forget about static, but I myself forgot. That's what happens when you do coding for a very long time. So let's just import this thing again, and what we'll do is we'll define the connections here only. Okay, again I'll show you the bad practices first, as I already promised you guys. So first we'll define this thing as null, and then I'll take a prepared statement. Okay, stmt or pstmt you can call it. Okay, so let's just import these things, use the java.sql.connection for this thing, and we can use the other ones as well. So those are better optimized as well, but I usually prefer to use this thing so as to avoid any compatibility issues and stuff. Okay, so after this thing what we need to do here is we need to now create a connection. This thing, we'll instantiate this thing, and we'll say data source dot get connection, but data source ds, sorry. Okay, and this will show some exceptions, so we'll catch those exceptions as well. Okay, that's great. And what we'll do is we'll define the statement here, and we'll write con dot prepare statement, and in this thing we'll just prepare some random statement. Like we'll not actually prepare a prepare statement, like we could, but like I'll just add a simple select this thing, select star from whatever table it is, the test table. Okay, and test tbl, and what we'll do is we'll have a result set for this thing. Result set rs is equals to new result set, sorry, stmt dot execute query, and this thing, and here while rs dot next is simply, okay, we need to this thing print writer, we forgot about print writer out is equals to response dot get writer. Okay, so out dot print line test id. Okay, rs dot get string test id. Okay, space. Let's just copy this thing because we are too lazy to type everything and too slow at typing as well, I guess. Test name, and what's the third parameter? Test addr. Okay, and let's just add another br tag after this one to make it look like new line. Okay, so now that we are done, we need to close this connection as well. So what people usually do is close this connection through a finally part. Or some people simply do not close the connection, because in most documentations you would find that whenever you are using this thing connection pools, you do not need to explicitly close the connections or something. I'll just be right back. Sorry for the interruption. So I had problem with my voice device, so it has fallen off, so I'm connecting through a different audio now. So let's just continue. So here what we see is a curious case of exception masking, you can say. So what happens here is, now when we call the con.close to be called inside the finally block, so what finally does is, whenever you have any kind of exception, the flow of your program changes. So sometimes whenever you acquire some resources from the computer, if the flow of your program changes, then the resources that you acquired from the computer, you need to give them back or release them for others to use. So like if you are holding any kind of database connection, any kind of file reader or file writing process you are doing, so that things need to be closed inside finally. So that is how finally works. But what happens when you close this connection inside a finally? So it will mask the exceptions. Okay, and here let me just put it this way and see how that fares. Okay, and I'll just add the catch clause. Okay, and now if we run this thing, hopefully this should run. Okay, and I'll just run this thing and go to the test servlet. Okay, taking much longer than expected. Okay, let's just, what do we call it, test servlet. Okay, so like test servlet. Oh, one test 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, so we have got all the values from the database. If we had multiple values, so they would be stacked one below the other. So like this thing works for now, right? So how do we check if the utility is reusing the threads or not, or it's creating new connections? So like for that purpose, what I will do is I will create another function, public static void, we'll call it logs. Okay, and in this logs, what I will do is I'll just call the number of active connections and the number of idle connections. Okay, source dot get num active and get num, these two functions we need to use, get num idle. Okay, so I'll just simply put them in the log here. So what I will do is system dot out dot print ln. Okay, and just simply place this thing, cut from here, paste it over here, same ways. Just again I'm playing the lazy fellow here, but yeah, just cut, paste. Okay, and here we'll add number of active connections and number of idle connections. Okay, so we'll call this log method every time we get a connection over here. So after this thing, we'll call this dbutility dot get logs. Okay, so like I should show it over here, I guess. So like every time I call a function, yeah, number of active connections 1. So like I'll just copy this thing into this thing, another one, and see again. Okay, it's showing 1 again, but if there's any exception in the data, it will not work. So like another way of doing thing is, like many people do it, like they do not close the connections here. So that is again a problem. Finally block is optional, so I'll just delete this thing. So that way I will show you what could go wrong with this thing. See here 1 and here 2, there's 3, there's 4. So like every time you refresh, you get this thing because you have not called the close method here. Okay, so if you forget to call the close method through finally like it was before, then you will get this problem. Okay, so now another thing that you could do is to restructure your code with try with resources. Okay, so what it will do is essentially, even if you do forget to write a finally block, because the finally block gets a bit, you can say, sketchy here. So sometimes people forget to write that thing, or you can say in manage code wherever they are referred the examples, there's no actual case. If you find it any place, like they have not defined whether you should close this connection after this thing or not. Some people might say you need to close, some people might say you need to not close that connection, GC will take care of it. But what it happens is, when your connections are not closed, even if you are using this thing, the pooling mechanism, those will not be sent to the GC immediately. Okay, so for that purpose we need to close them. So slight restructuring of the code that we will do here is, we'll just write here try, and this statement we'll just comment it out for now. and simply we'll take it here. Okay, connection con. Okay, so what it does is it will automatically close this connection, like the explicitly we closed down here using the finally block. It will close it automatically, so there's no reason or no need to write a finally block, which is a bit complex, because inside the finally block also, if you have seen carefully, I had to write the try catch block. Okay, so that is a overkill, you can say. So it saves an overhead and also helps in writing a clean code. Okay, so I'll just run this thing again, and this thing as well, 1 1. Okay, I'll just refresh it multiple times. Let's just see here, it is still showing number of active connections as 1. Okay, so technically it is not using extra resources. So that was the whole point of using connection pooling. So like any resource that has been allocated or allotted, that will be reused between the cycling of this code. So like that is how it works. So I hope this discussion, this whole video and the code that we did would be somehow helpful to you guys, and I will just put the code in the description. Okay, I'll put a GitHub link for it. If you need or think that it could be helpful to you, you can refer that. Okay, thank you.